Today, we're going to be looking at how societal choices can have some pretty big consequences for a civilization.
Ah.
We're going to be turning to the Book of Ether in the Book of Mormon,
Okay.
specifically chapter 14,
Yeah.
which gives us a glimpse into a war-torn society struggling under a strange curse.
It's not your everyday curse.
Right.
Imagine waking up one morning and all your tools are gone.
Oh, wow.
Your phone, your car keys, your computer. How would you feel? How would it change the way you interact with others?
I think I'd panic.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, verse 1 of Ether 14 sets the scene with this exact scenario. It explains that tools would vanish overnight.
It wasn't just about missing tools, was it? This really created a ripple effect throughout society, didn't it?
Absolutely. It eroded trust and led to fear and isolation. Listen to how verse 2 describes it. Wherefore every man did cleave unto that which was his own with his hands, and would not borrow, neither would he lend. And every man kept the hilt of his sword in his right hand, in the defense of his property and his own life, and of his wives and children.
So this constant fear of theft and inability to rely on your neighbor,
Yeah,
everyone's on edge, ready to defend themselves.
exactly.
It's a recipe for chaos.
And this atmosphere of suspicion and fear becomes the breeding ground for the tumultuous events that unfold in the rest of the chapter. We see rulers rise and fall in quick succession, each meeting a rather grim end.
Let's talk about this power struggle. Verse 3 tells us about Shaird's death, followed by his brother Gilead taking over. But his reign didn't last long.
No, Gilead is assassinated, and this imposing figure named Lib takes his place. Verse 10 describes him as a giant, and the text points to secret combinations playing a role in these power struggles.
Ah, those secret combinations. They never seem to lead to anything good.
No.
Have you ever seen similar dynamics play out in today's world, where groups operate in secrecy, manipulating events for their own gain?
It's a timeless pattern, unfortunately. The desire for power and control often drives people to form these clandestine alliances.
Right.
It undermines trust and sows discord. In the case of the Jaredites, it suggests deep-seated corruption, a lust for power that overrides any sense of unity or common good. It's a dog-eat-dog world where trust is completely eroded.
And into this chaotic mix steps Coriantumr, who we've encountered before in the Book of Ether. It sounds like he's caught in a never-ending cycle of battles.
He is. Verses 11 through 16 detail this back-and-forth conflict between Coriantumr and Lib. The violence escalates with each battle, culminating in Lib's death. But even that doesn't bring peace.
It seems like things just go from bad to worse. Then comes Shiz, Lib's brother, who sounds even more ruthless,
Yeah.
for reading verse 17 correctly.
Shiz takes vengeance to a whole new level. He doesn't just defeat Coriantumr's armies, he destroys cities, slays women and children, leaving a path of destruction in his wake. His reign of terror is so profound that verse 18 describes people crying out, "Who can stand before the army of Shiz? Behold, he sweepeth the earth before him."
You can almost feel the terror spreading throughout the land,
Yeah.
like a wildfire of violence consuming everything in its path.
And that brings us to verses 19 through 23, which paint a truly horrifying image of war's devastating impact. Imagine a land so saturated with death that the stench of decay fills the air with bodies left unburied,
Right.
and people living in constant fear.
It's a stark reminder of the brutality and senselessness of war.
Yeah.
But is there a deeper message here? What's the writer trying to convey with these graphic descriptions?
I think it's a powerful indictment of the consequences of unchecked wickedness.
Okay.
This society's choices, their descent into violence and corruption, have literally poisoned the land and its people.
Right.
They've reached a point where the very air they breathe is a reminder of death and despair.
So Shiz is driven by vengeance. But there's also a prophecy at play, right? Mentioned in verse 24.
That's right. He's not just seeking revenge for his brother's death. He's also fueled by a prophecy that Coriantumr won't die by the sword. This sadly makes Shiz even more determined to hunt him down and inflict as much suffering as possible. It's a twisted interpretation of a prophecy driven by hate and obsession. Think about it. How does vengeance warp our perceptions and lead us down destructive paths?
That's an interesting point. It makes me think about how easily we can misinterpret or manipulate information to justify our own desires, especially when driven by powerful emotions.
Precisely. And this brings us back to verse 25, connecting Shiz's actions with that opening curse on the land. It seems like everything has come full circle. Listen to this. And thus we see that the Lord did visit them in the fullness of his wrath, and their wickedness and abominations had prepared a way for their everlasting destruction.
Wow.
This verse highlights the direct consequences of their choices. Their descent into darkness has invited divine judgment.
So the stage is set for a final showdown between Shiz and Coriantumr. Where does their story go from here?
We've been discussing the intense conflict and bloodshed in Ether chapter 14. This society just on this path of self-destruction. It makes you wonder if there were any points along the way where they could have made different choices. Any missed opportunities for peace or reconciliation.
Yeah, building on that, did anyone try to break free from this cycle of violence? Were there any voices of reason calling for a different path?
It's hard to say for sure. The text focuses primarily on the actions of the leaders, those in power. But in verse 20, we see that people kept fleeing to join either Shiz or Coriantumr's armies. It almost seems like a desperate search for stability, even if it meant siding with a ruthless tyrant.
So even amidst the chaos, people were still looking for leadership, someone to follow.
I think so. Sadly, their choices were limited, shaped by fear and desperation. The cycle of violence had become a self-fulfilling prophecy, leaving them with only two options, fight or flee.
What a tragic situation. But this idea of choices and consequences really resonates. It reminds me of a principle we learn in the Doctrine and Covenants, specifically section 130, verses 20 and 21. There is a law, irrevocably decreed in heaven before the foundations of this world, upon which all blessings are predicated. And when we obtain any blessing from God, it is by obedience to that law upon which it is predicated.
That connection is spot on. This principle of blessings and consequences applies to societies just as much as it does to individuals. The choices a nation makes collectively have a direct impact on its well-being and its future.
Exactly. And in the case of the Jaredites in Ether 14, their choices led them down a path of destruction. Fulfilling the prophecy outlined in the first verse about the curse upon the land, they sowed the seeds of their own downfall.
It's like they inflicted a wound upon themselves that just kept festering, leading to more pain, more division, and ultimately more death. They allowed fear, greed, and the desire for vengeance to poison their society, which ultimately brought about the very judgment they feared.
But even in the darkest moments, we see glimmers of individual agency, people making difficult choices that went against the grain. In verse 27, some people fled to the land of Korihor and they faced opposition from those who didn't want to join them. Even in the face of such pressure, there was still resistance, a refusal to be swept along by the tide of violence.
That's a really astute observation. It shows us that even when a society is crumbling, individual choices still have power. There's always a possibility for courage, for standing up for what you believe is right, even when it seems like all hope is lost.
It makes you wonder what might have happened if more people had chosen that path. What if they had united to resist the tyranny of leaders like Shiz? Could they have changed the course of their history?
That's the question, isn't it? It reminds us that even in seemingly hopeless situations, individual acts of courage and compassion can ripple outward, inspiring others and potentially altering a society's trajectory.
So, reflecting on the events of Ether 14, it's clear that it's not just a historical account. It's a powerful lesson about the impact of our choices, both as individuals and as a collective. What we decide, what we do, it all matters.
Absolutely. It prompts us to examine our own choices, to consider how we contribute to the well-being of our communities and our nations. We're all called to cultivate courage, compassion, and a commitment to justice, even when we're afraid, even when we're facing adversity, even when it's tempting to just take the easy way out.
Those are certainly some weighty themes to contemplate.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up our exploration of Ether 14, let's keep these lessons in mind. This look at Ether 14 has been really eye-opening, a sobering reminder of how the choices we make can shape a civilization's destiny.
Yeah, it really underscores that point, that our actions, both individually and collectively, can have ripple effects down the line. Pretty serious ones.
We've seen firsthand how fear and mistrust can take root,
Right.
leading to violence and this cycle of destruction, almost impossible to break.
It seems that way.
And yet, amidst all that darkness, we also saw those flickers of hope. Individuals who made different choices, even when everyone around them was, succumbing to the pressure.
Yeah.
Like those who refused to join the armies and instead sought refuge.
Right.
Those acts of defiance, however small they might seem, remind us we always have a choice.
That's true.
We don't have to be swept along by the tide.
That's such a crucial point. Ether 14 isn't just some ancient history lesson.
Right.
It's a call to action. It challenges us to look at our own lives, how our choices are shaping the world around us.
It makes you ask yourself some hard questions, doesn't it? Are we contributing to that fear and division? Or are we working to build those bridges of understanding and compassion?
Those are the questions we need to be grappling with. The fate of our societies really does hinge on the choices we make each and every day.
Well, that's a powerful thought to leave us with. We want to thank you for joining us today as we explored Ether 14. We hope this discussion has given you something to think about, maybe sparked a bit of introspection. Because, as we've seen, our choices really do matter.
They do. And remember, even when faced with what seem like insurmountable challenges, there's always hope. There's always the possibility for change, for growth, for creating a better future. Don't lose sight of that.
Well said. Thanks again for being with us, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast for more discussions like this one.